Hi, welcome to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of the Beach Boys on bootleg recording. Now, rock and roll bootlegs really did not exist before the late 60s. Prior to that time, there had been bootleg recordings of jazz artists, even some classical, but rock and roll was considered kids' music. It was not something that an aficionado would want to do a deep dive into. Of course, attitudes had begun to change. And in July of 1969, in some of the hipper record stores, usually behind the counter somewhere, there began to appear a record in just a plain white sleeve with the words Great White Wonder stamped on the front of it. And what that was were recordings of Bob Dylan and the band made in 1967, the so-called basement tapes. And that became the first rock and roll bootleg. After that, bootlegging took off in the 70s. There were literally hundreds of titles for bands like the Rolling Stones, Dylan, the Beatles, the Who, Led Zeppelin, all the big acts. Most of it was live recordings, some studio outtakes. Most of the sound quality was passable to terrible. Some of them were unbelievably bad, like somebody had smuggled in a tape recorder under their coat and forgot to take their coat off, and they'd still produce a record that just sounded like a muffled brrrr. Over the years, I've heard a few of those. Anyway, here are some samples. These are all from the 70s. This is the Beatles, obviously. Now, this is demos that they recorded for Decca Records prior to getting their deal with Parlophone. It's kind of one of the nicer albums from that time. This is more typical of what you'd get. A plain white sleeve. This is a photocopied sheet of paper glued to the front, kind of held in by the shrink wrap. You can see inside the label is just blank. Sometimes there'd be something misleading on the label. Usually they were just blank. This one has song separation between the tracks. I don't know if you can see, I guess you can. A lot of them just look like one plain side with no song separation, though there'd be multiple songs on them. Another similar, here's a Bob Dylan, again with the plain sleeve and the photocopied cover. A live Bob Dylan from the late 70s. This one obviously a little bit nicer, double concert album. Sound quality's a little better than most, but nothing to recommend it. Here is Rolling Stones, a little nicer one, and this is again a more typical. This is live in 1978, again with the photocopied cover. But still got the original price sticker. What did this cost? This was $5 back in 1979. As I say, the sound quality on these ranged from passable to terrible. Most of them I played once, never listened to again. And that was in the 70s. Since that time, many of these things have been released officially in good sound quality, something that the fans really have enjoyed. The things that were really worth hearing have mostly been released now. So these have become sort of historic relics. During this period, the Beach Boys, not being one of the hipper bands in anyone's mind, were not bootlegged very much at all. This despite the fact that they were reputed to have the leakiest vaults in the business. They recorded a lot of songs that didn't get released. They had home studios later on, so they'd record at home. They'd pass out tapes, things. There was very little security, and there was the potential for them to be heavily bootlegged. They just were not, at the time, artists that people took seriously enough and thought there was a market for to press up very many bootlegs. For a lot of years, really, the main Beach Boy bootleg was a thing that was generally called Resurfin' USA. It was a live album. A lot of sources say that it was recorded at Madison Square Garden in 1972, though I've heard and believe that it was actually Princeton, New Jersey, November 1971, just based on the tracks being mostly from the album Surf's Up, which was current at the time. My version is missing, you can see where it was torn off back here, the photocopy cover, but somebody on the version that I found had gone to and cut pictures out of a magazine and actually taped them onto the front and back. So I have the one-of-a-kind one. If anybody recognizes this, and contact me. If you're the one who did this, it would be great to hear from you. I found it in, pretty sure this came from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Let me read you the track listing. It's kind of interesting. This one actually has the track list printed on it, so it's a little bit higher quality, at least graphics-wise, than a lot of these things. So what you've got on side one is Good Vibrations, followed by Don't Go Near the Water, Darlin', Wouldn't It Be Nice, Long Promised Road, and Student Demonstration Time. Second side, you've got Disney Girls, Take a Load Off Your Feet, Sloop John B., and Surfin' USA. As I say, I played this maybe once. It was kind of interesting to hear the 1971 tracks, you know, the tracks from the Surf's Up album live, because at the time you couldn't hear them anyplace else. But it's not something you'd put on for your listening pleasure, certainly. It's just not of that quality. Another early Beach Boy bootleg was this one, Beach Boys Meet the Grateful Dead. The Beach Boys were brought on as special guests of the Grateful Dead on April 27, 1971, during their stint at the Fillmore East. I think this exists mainly as a Grateful Dead bootleg. Grateful Dead, again, some band that was heavily bootlegged. I don't think this would exist if it wasn't for the fact that the Grateful Dead are part of it. And what happened was the Beach Boys were, you know, surprise special guests. The Dead played some tracks, and then they come out and perform with the Dead on the Searching by the Coasters, and then on Riot in Cell Block Number 9. Then the Dead left the stage. The Beach Boys played Good Vibrations, I Get Around, and Help Me Rhonda, all of which are on here. Then the Dead return. They play with the Beach Boys Okie from Muskogee and Johnny Be Good. Then the Beach Boys leave and the Dead continue. The sound quality is not great, as I recall, and the performance itself is shambolic. The Dead and the Beach Boys were not tightly rehearsed. If you can believe that, it was kind of seat of the pants at best. Anyway, that was it for quite a while as far as Beach Boy on bootleg record. Things began to pick up a little bit in the late 70s when somebody launched a series called the Beach Boy Collector Series. And the first release on that was a 45 of Surfer Moon and Humpty Dumpty, not recorded by the Beach Boys, but by Bob and Sherry. It was a very early Brian Wilson production. Bob Norberg was Brian's first roommate, and he also co-wrote Back Home. It's just somebody that was around in Brian's sphere in the early days. And Sherry was a woman that he later recorded and produced as Sharon Marie. They did a very obscure single, Humpty Dumpty and Surfer Moon. Somebody got it, pressed up bootleg copies of it in a nice little picture sleeve. I never got it. I got the material elsewhere on an official release. I don't think I ever saw it even. December 1980, I was at Wax Trax Records in Chicago, which was a great store, by the way. I miss it. And got this, the second volume of the Beach Boy Collector Series. And this actually is the Beach Boys. It's called Hawthorne Hot Shots. It's a double 7-inch. And I haven't looked at it in a while. There's some little card here. Sorry, that's too bright. Let's see. That's just some nonsense about the record label. What is on this is side one of the first single. You've got an alternate version of Good Vibrations. You've got Lady by Dennis Wilson. And then you've got the other side, Sound of Free. Lady and Sound of Free were two sides of a single that Dennis Wilson released under the name Dennis and Rumbo. Dennis being Dennis Wilson and Rumbo being Daryl Dragon, who was later the Captain and Captain and Tennille. They did this one-off single together, and that's bootlegged here. Oh, there's a rather useless track here of Al Jardine and Johnny Rivers on an educational program describing what melody is. The second 7-inch has an alternate version of Heroes and Villains, an unreleased at the time track, I Just Got My Pay, the theme from the Karen TV show, which ran in 1964 or 5, was performed by the Beach Boys. We'll talk more about that show in another video. A very nice alternate mix of Till I Die from the Surf's Up album, and an unreleased track at the time, San Miguel. So this was, you know, the first time you got something that was really interesting and was Beach Boys, and the sound quality was a little better. It was almost listenable. It was pretty good. The third volume I purchased through a magazine, I believe it's still around. At the time it was more of a newspaper, called Goldmine. And what you mainly bought Goldmine for was it had hundreds of classified ads listing rare and unusual records. And what you do is, some of them are auction. This is pre-internet. So you would write, I bid X for this, and put it in an envelope, send it off, wait a week or two, get a letter back saying, you won the auction, send me a check. So you'd send them a check. Sometimes it was a set sale, you could just put the check in and send it. Other times it was an auction. And you'd send them your check would clear the bank, and then hopefully in 4 to 6 weeks, your records would turn up in the mail. They didn't always turn up. I spent, I don't remember whether it was $30 or $45, something like that. It was a lot of money at the time for a copy of the Monkees Presents that never turned up. If you're out there, my check cleared the bank, you still owe me my copy of Monkees Presents. I'm still sore about that to this day. I can carry a grudge, man. So, through Goldmine, I purchased Beach Boy Collector Series Volume 3, The Honeys. It's a box set, and the Honeys, of course, were the group Brian Wilson put together and produced that consisted of his wife, his sister-in-law, and their cousin. And there were several singles that came out. None of them were great chart successes. And then there were other sessions that were unreleased. And these were all collected together on an album. And there was some packaging. Anyway, I believe that this is a bootleg of the bootleg, because the sound quality on it, as I remember, was terrible. I was so disappointed in it. I never played it again. After I listened to it the first time, it was unlistenable. There may have been some, there was promised to have been some package. I haven't opened this thing since 1982. And I thought I would leave it and open it here on this video and see what's in it. It's be almost like a brand new unboxing. I never wanted to go near it after I heard it. Let's see. So we've got, okay, the record label looks pretty decent. I mean, it's actually got graphics on it, and the name, and it's even got times. So that's pretty professional looking. Kind of surprising. Let's see. It's got song separation. I mean, this looks good, but boy, I remember the sound quality being just terrible. And, oh, cool. There's some sort of phony sheet music in here. I don't remember this. And we got the Beach Boys on the back. And there's an essay of some kind. I'll see. Wow. Oh, cool. And then there's looks like there's descriptions of the songs. I'll look at this is cool. I didn't know I had this. Wow. I will, I'll read this and let you know if there's anything interesting in there. Kind of cool. Well, yeah, that's all right. And then there was supposed to have been a badge. I can see there's no badge, but there is apparently a poster. Surf Bash, Beach Boys, Jan and Dean and the Honeys. Obviously, it was not too hard to reproduce the graphics on that thing, but that's kind of cool to have. So maybe I'll get some use out of it after all. I will read that booklet. So the Beach Boy Collector Series carried on by releasing the front cover and back cover of the unreleased Smile album. There was also going to be another 45 that was going to have a longer version of rock and roll music. the studio version of We've Got Love and some other kind of less interesting things. It never came out. I've seen copies of the picture sleeve, which was a picture of Brian Wilson biting a 45 record. That never happened. The series folded. That takes us up to about 1980. In the 80s, things got a lot more interesting. We'll talk about that next time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if there's anything that I missed. I think that's pretty comprehensive for the 70s. After that, it gets a little more complicated. But let me know if I missed anything. I'm always trying to learn more about this stuff. If you liked it, please hit like. Please subscribe. There's a lot more to talk about. We'll carry on with more in our next episode. Thanks.